The GNU has a foreign policy problem. On one hand, you have the ANC, who align with China, support Russia, and love the Palestinians. On the other hand, you have the DA, who align with the West, support Ukraine, and love Israel when it's convenient for them. The GNU has a foreign policy problem because South Africa then would be moving in two different directions. Who will win? The ANC has put it out plain and clear that they are in charge of foreign policy, as they have been for the last 30 years, and that is not the DA's domain. The DA is saying the ANC is moving the country in the wrong direction with this, and they should actually be moving and finding new alliances and leaning in a different direction.
Let's get into this discussion now. The Democratic Alliance has slammed President Cyril Ramaphosa for calling Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin a valuable ally. This was during the BRICS summit. The second largest party in the current government of national unity says it does not represent its view, describing Russia as an authoritarian regime which has violated international law with its war on Ukraine.
The ANC is definitely not going to change, and it's impossible for them to. And the DA, being the liberals they are more likely to change. So either way, we're going to be moving to the wrong direction, and I think the ANC might have the DA won on this one.
What exactly is the problem for the Democratic Alliance when the president of South Africa says, and I quote, Russia is a valuable ally and a friend of South Africa?
Good evening. Thank you for having me. Well, I think that the problem is twofold. Firstly, it seems as if the president may have forgotten that his party no longer enjoys an outright majority in government. And as such, the ANC are no longer at liberty to unilaterally determine South Africa's foreign policy positions without consulting their key partners in the government of national unity.
But we can do better, because both of them are a mistake. The way the ANC government has been running the foreign policy of South Africa for the last 30 years has been a mistake, actually. The DA will move us in a direction that is just not South Africa. Too liberal, too woke, and too affirming. That's just not South Africa. The true foreign policy of South Africa should be one with a far more conservative leaning. It should be very pragmatic, very logical, and very business and open market orientated. First thing, Africa. We should minimize our involvement in the AU. We should be as involved as little as possible with the African Union and want nothing really to do with them. We should be in the AU by name only, actually. We should exist within the AU in the way America exists in the UN. You have power in there and you have the ability to control things, but you don't really have to adhere to anything they say.
Perfect!
Because we are actually holding the cards to be able to do that. The AU is a defunct organization that's not going anywhere. For us, it should be almost a cosplay. We should be involved and show up to meetings, but it should not be that serious. We should be involved enough to know exactly what's going on, to have power in that organization and to direct it. But like I say, they should have no power to tell us to do anything. That's what a conservative government of South Africa would do. Become a member of this channel today on our Buy Me a Coffee page. You'll get exclusive members-only content, which are courses, 15 to 30 minutes long. We add a new one every single month on various topics linked to the channel. When you're a member, you get access to all of them on our Buy Me a Coffee page. Check it out. The link is in the description. Subscribe to the channel. If you don't, I know you're the one that burnt down Parliament. As far as Palestine goes, we would switch sides immediately and leave the Palestinians alone and tell them to lose our number. Because if the Palestinians were serious about building a people group and building their little area into something, they would have turned it into a Singapore or a Hong Kong a long time ago. The scam of the Palestinians is that they want the money from the UN, and their leaders have to keep them poor and fighting with the Israelis and as permanent refugees so that that money keeps flowing. The Palestinian thing is a scam, and any allegiance the ANC ever had to the Palestinians does not need to be our allegiance going forward. We should use the same policy for anyone else who's like the Palestinians, and we should use the same principle for any other group anywhere in the world that's similar to this. We should not align ourselves with the sort of ideology that permeates the Palestinian cause. As far as BRICS is concerned,
the BRICS family has an important role in addressing the key challenges of the Global South in partnership with like-minded emerging market economies. We look forward to the report that will be given by our finance ministers and central bank governors on the use of local currencies in international trade and financial transactions between BRICS members and their trading partners.
Stay in BRICS but should want a bigger role because we are the gateway to Africa, and we should be working very hard every day to make sure that China and Russia do not become the dominant voice over Africa. We should be working hard to develop SADC into a powerful force. We should then be brokering deals all over Africa and working very hard to do that, just like the Chinese and the Russians are, but tying them back into this powerful region we have down here in SADC and the access we have all over Africa as leverage for more power in BRICS. And we should use BRICS as a leverage against the West, not because we're choosing against the West. We should view the West and BRICS in the way someone who has two competing job offers would. He uses one to leverage better outcomes or a better offer out of the other. And he does that back and forth between the two all the time. We should not choose a side between BRICS or the West. We should stand independently and become a relevant country with a strong economy, with control over SADC, the most powerful networks in Africa, with a booming economy so that we're relevant. We become an important country outright and people want to court us. We shouldn't be asking for a seat at the table everywhere we go.
It will help us not to participate as unequal cousins in these institutions. It will help us to participate fully, and so that we don't have a sense that we are beggars, that we are being dealt with out of generosity. I think it's important in the new era that the world is in now that there should be a good measure of equality among sovereign nations.
If you're doing that, you're already losing. And BRICS for us should be a partnership that we use to our advantage, and we should do the same with the West, and we leverage the two against each other because we are the primary portal to Africa. That's how our foreign policy should be. We shouldn't be siding with either one, because either one could be our friends or our enemy tomorrow. Let's take a lesson from Ukraine. Ukraine wanted to push west and ended up being in trouble with Russia because Russia saw that as an encroachment to them, as an encroachment of the West right on their border if Ukraine became part of the EU. Now, the lesson of Ukraine is very simple for South Africa. We don't need to side with them or be against them. It's none of our business. Ukraine could not defend itself in the end and needed someone else to defend them. It needed help from the Western Europeans who were not that keen to do it in the first place.
You want
And the Americans are using it as a proxy war to test out all their new stuff while the Ukrainians are dying, and test out how they would fight the Russians if they had to. The Russians are trying to take back the territory and expand and create a buffer to protect themselves against the West. Don't be Ukraine. Have a strong economy and a strong military so that you can defend yourself, that you can fend people off. That's the lesson South Africa has to take. South Africa doesn't need to be for Ukraine or against it. We need to learn from it. Don't be like them. They were ill-prepared. They were running a dysfunctional government. They had no military to stand up on, and their economy was frail. They could not stand for themselves. If a country can't stand for themselves, you will be the puppet for some other country's desires, like they are now for Russia and for the US and for the Western Europeans. And everyone else will post your flag on their social media. But how does that help you when the men of your country are dying? South Africa should take a lesson from that and not be like them at all. We now have a course on Teachable. is for boys between the ages of 10 and 18, about 12 men from the Bible, where we teach about manhood, masculinity, and becoming a man. Check it out. The way forward is simple. If we're ever pushed into a corner to choose between the two, do we choose the BRICS side or do we choose the West? We always choose the West. That's actually what South Africa is. It's a mixture of African values and Western values. Love it or hate it, that's what the country is. And it actually can work very well if the countries run well. If we're not trying to beat each other over the head and dominate each other every 5 seconds, and we actually realize what we can build and just build on those principles. Take up the reality that you are in Africa, this is where the country is, and then take up the values that build great countries. And a lot of those have been Western values. And you mix those two things, now you're starting to build a good country. And if we ever pushed into a situation where we have to choose, you never choose Russia, you never choose China, because the internal logic of the political ideology of those two countries is not in line with us, and it's not something we believe in. China can imprison whole groups of people because of their religion or their ethnicity. We do not want to be like that country, and they constantly are in surveillance of people, and you can disappear from the top businessman to a peasant on the street. You can disappear. And Russia, that's just a puzzle shop that Vladimir Putin runs. We do not want to be run like that at all. If we are going to choose, we choose on values, and we choose the Western values, whether those Western countries are still in line with those values themselves or not. That's not our problem. If America wants to turn communist, if Canada wants to turn communist, if the European countries want to turn socialist, that's up to them. We choose the values that built those great countries. We're not saying we want to be them. We're going to be ourselves. We do not choose the Palestinians because we're not in a struggle. We're trying to be a country that thrives, like Singapore. We're not trying to get stuck in the mud, fighting blood feuds that will never end, that will always result in killing and your people moving backwards. The South African foreign policy for the last 30 years has not been very good, and in the GNU you see the two sides. The ANC, aligned to China, supporting Russia and loves the Palestinians. The DA, aligned to the West, supports Ukraine and loves Israel when it's convenient. The ANC is too far left, too irresponsible, too corrupt, and too socialist. The DA is too libertine, too liberal, too socialist, and too flexible to ever build a great country. We will turn our kids into people who don't even know if they're a boy or a girl if we follow the DA, and if we follow the ANC, we'll turn them into perpetual victims that want the white man to throw them a dry piece of bread while a fly flies into their mouth. Either way, that's not South Africa. South Africa is a conservative country in Africa with African values and a superstructure of Western values and a mixture of the two, and can build a great country. There's a reason why South Africa is the best country to live in on Africa. If you're going to be born anywhere in Africa, you want to be born in South Africa. And it can be one of the best countries in the world if it's properly run, and the foreign policy would reflect that. The conclusion is very simple. South Africa needs to be a relevant country. We don't need to pick sides, and if we're ever forced to, we pick the mixture of African values and Western values in the African context, because that's who this country is. A saying, the most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have. Soren Kierkegaard. The future of this country will be determined, in part, by which direction we pick, the ANC foreign policy or the DA foreign policy. I say both are imposters and should be rejected. We choose a far more conservative, logical, free market view that I've outlined in this video. African values mixed with Western values in the African context. That's South Africa. And that's what our foreign policy should be. We build rather a relevant country that can pick friends and partners whenever it chooses to, because it has the gateway to Africa, it has a strong economy, and it's one of the best countries in the world, and we can pick and choose our own friends. We don't have to be forced into friendships with anybody. Because we don't need them, we can always do business with someone else because we're that relevant. That should be our goal. If that's not our goal, you end up like Ukraine. The case is closed, my friend. The GNU has a foreign policy problem. Both of their answers are wrong. Thank you for listening. If you dare, buy us a coffee. The link is in the description.
Tata Kopi